Today we're taking a look at an iPhone 3GS that I purchased on eBay as open box. So this is definitely the oldest open box device I have ever purchased, and I am pretty excited about it. This was the third iPhone Apple ever released. It came out back in 2009. Taking a look around the box here, you can see we have the white color option, which I am super excited about because those are quite a bit harder to find compared to the black ones. On the back here, we can see that this one has 16 gigabytes of storage. I checked the serial number for this device on Apple's website, and it does report that the device has never been activated. Funny enough, their chat coverage website is really glitchy right now, so it actually shows a pair of AirPods as the device photo. I also checked the production date for this based on the serial number, and that shows early December 2009. Comparing that with the Wikipedia page for all of the different versions of iPhone OS 3, we should be running 3.1.2. Let's go ahead and take a look at the device itself now. And there we go, we have the 3GS in its original plastic film. We do have some bubbles here and some scratching, but I was expecting that with this open box listing. From all of the old YouTube videos I've watched where people were unboxing these back in 2009, this does appear to be consistent with the type of seal they were using. We have a little pull tab here with this perforated design. So using that to pick the device up, we can take a look at the back here. And it is definitely a treat to look at one of these in such perfect condition. This white color especially had a really bad tendency to wear. Bringing in a white iPhone 3G I have here, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So they would get all sorts of cracks and just imperfections and not look so good. Let's see what we have in terms of accessories. Well, it's looking like no accessories were included, but we do have the literature packet here. And here is a throwback. This is when Apple was still including the SIM ejector tool by default. And for the documentation itself, we first off have a quick start guide here. So this is really cool to take a look at, definitely from an era where this was necessary to show you how to use all the features on the iPhone. Aside from this, we also have a more detailed product information guide and 2 Apple stickers. Getting back to the iPhone itself now, as I said, this seal does appear to be consistent with what Apple was using back at the time. And slightly pulling on this little tab here, I get quite a bit of resistance, so I am pretty sure that this was never fully removed from the device. That being said, I have to do so to charge the device up as the 30-pin connector is covered by plastic right now. So let's go ahead and do that now. Breaking the seal on an iPhone from 2009, this definitely feels crazy. Okay, wow, well that was extremely satisfying. And the device is looking basically flawless. Definitely my number one concern for this iPhone is the battery. Being almost 17 years old, which is probably older than a good portion of people watching this video, I'm not too confident that it will charge up. Luckily, battery replacements are really easy to do on this model, and I do have a donor device available to pull apart from. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. I have a 30-pin cable here connected to a 12-watt power adapter. Okay, well so far I did get the charging screen for a second, but then the device went to the Apple logo and then that turned off. Now I'm not getting any signs of life, so I'm not too sure. I might end up changing power adapters to the smaller 5-watt. Okay, well after stepping down to a 5-watt, it looks like the device is powering on. Okay, and we boot right into the iPhone OS 3 activation screen. Sadly, in the battery icon, we are getting the fully charged indicator here. So that likely means that the battery is cooked. But that's okay, as I said, I definitely expected that going into this. And at least the iPhone will power on and allow you to use it on 5-watt power. So our next step here is connecting it to a computer for activation. Hopefully that goes through without any sort of issues. By the way, the reason that I can confirm this is iPhone OS 3 from the activation screen is pretty simple. First off, we have the older iTunes logo, but that's not a foolproof method because some of those were used in early versions of iOS 4. The dead giveaway is the curved USB cord here. This was switched to the more squared off one with any version of iOS 4. I'm going to be using my 2019 iMac here to attempt activation. Well, actually maybe not quite yet, because it looks like the 5-watt power supplied from the computer is not enough to power the device. So we will probably need to go ahead with the battery replacement before we can do the activation. So here's the iPhone 3GS that I'm going to be pulling the battery from. This one is also a 16 gig white model in pretty much mint condition. Sadly, it's what Apple considers a new boot ROM model, so you are not able to do a pure downgrade to iPhone OS 3. Basically, there's some sort of patch that runs on this for the downgrade, so it gives you a significant delay for like powering the device on or waking it from sleep. So I was never really happy with this device for that reason. I did hold on to it because it's in such good condition. Definitely more excited though to get the pure iPhone OS 3 experience. So let's get these batteries swapped out. First off, we have a couple of Phillips head screws on each side of the 30-pin connector. Once those have been pulled out, the display is only really held in with clips, so you can use a suction cup to get it removed. And once you are inside, you will see something pretty crazy. This model, along with the iPhone 3G, definitely goes down in history as being one of the most repairable iPhones ever. For whatever reason, Apple really felt like helping us out with this one, so the connectors are numbered in what order you are supposed to take them out. So starting off here with the display connectors, we have 1, 2, and 3. Connector 3 is a little bit more delicate. You have this little flip tab here and like a ribbon that goes in. But just like that, the display is now free. The battery actually lives here under the logic board. So that may sound a little bit intimidating, but it's actually pretty easy to get under here. First off, we will pop out the SIM card tray. Then we can turn our attention back to the numbered connectors here with 4, 5, 6, and 7. Then we have 8 screws, all of which are Phillips head, and only one of them is covered by some do not remove tape here. Now that all of those screws have been removed, the logic board should be free. And there we go, we now have access to the battery. So here you can see kind of how the battery makes a connection. It just sits on these pins on the back of the logic board. We have a small pull tab here at the top to get some leverage to remove this. However, there definitely is a good amount of adhesive under here, so I'm going to apply some heat before I try and pull on that. Okay, and I finally got that battery swapped into the 3GS here. The original battery in there was actually slightly expanded. Okay, and perfect. It looks like the device has activated. So that is really amazing. Let's take a first look at the iPhone OS 3 home screen. Right off the bat, let's jump here into settings so we can find out which version we have for sure. And nice, we do have 3.1.2 here as expected, and confirmation of that 16 gig capacity. So really amazing stuff. I am so glad that I was able to get this open box 3GS working. So now I'm going to give this battery a chance to get fully charged up, and then we can take a closer look at the device. Okay, well, I ended up spending some time getting to know this iPhone 3GS a little bit better. I got some apps and games synced here from iTunes. I also got some music here so we can take a look at the iPod application. But first, let's take a second and talk about the history of the iPhone 3GS. So as I touched on before, this model came out in June of 2009. It was actually not announced by Steve Jobs himself because he was on medical leave at the time. Instead, it was announced by the marketing executive Phil Schiller, who ended up announcing a bunch of future iPhones as well. But the 3GS here was the very first S-model iPhone. So it gave us that S-model formula that would become very popular in future iPhones. Basically, the formula was looking very similar, if not identical, to the previous iPhone model, but making internal improvements. So the 3GS here had largely the same plastic design as the iPhone 3G before it. The plastic here was very polished and reflective. It also came in the black color. Pretty much the only way to visually tell a 3G from a 3GS is to look for the reflective text here on the back. As in the 3G, it was just a gray writing instead. The original iPhone was quite a bit better than the 3G and the 3GS in terms of materials. As you can see, that model was largely aluminum here, with only a plastic window at the bottom for the antennas. But the original iPhone was super expensive, between $400 and $600 on a typical 2-year carrier contract. Back in 2008, when the iPhone 3G came out, it was understandable that it went to a plastic design because it was so much cheaper. It moved down to only $200 to $300 on those carrier contracts. Of course, we also had the full glass front panel. That, along with the display, was definitely the star of the show in the iPhone lineup. This 3.5-inch glass touchscreen just works so much better than the competition. And one of the biggest reasons for that is Apple was using capacitive touch technology. Many other old touchscreens were using something called resistive technology. That's usually used for plastic touchscreens, and basically you have to apply force when you press because the layers have to push together to recognize your touch. But getting back to the physical design for a second, aside from the plastic back panel here, we did have a metal piece for the bezel. This was very polished and reflective, kind of reminds you of like iPods with their stainless steel back panels. We had the 30-pin connector on the bottom with the speaker and microphone flanking it. Then we had the mute switch and the buttons, which also had the mirrored metal look. Then up top we had the 3.5mm headphone jack that also has a mirrored little insert. Over time that would pretty much disintegrate, as you can see here on my 3G. By the way, on the topic of headphones, these are the type that Apple was including with the 3GS. As you can see, their design here is pretty much perfectly circular, and as you can expect, they were super uncomfortable in the ear. I was really young when Apple was giving out these headphones, and I remember them giving my ears excruciating pain. But other than that, we also had the SIM card tray here on top. This was the last iPhone to have the full-size SIM tray. In the following iPhone 4, the tray moved to the side of the device, and it was the micro SIM standard. So what were the improvements for the iPhone 3GS compared to the 3G? So the biggest internal improvement was in speed. In fact, speed is what the S in iPhone 3GS stood for. So it was really cool that with this model, Apple came out and told us what the S stood for. With the future S models, that definitely became a little bit more ambiguous. Fueling the boost in performance for the 3GS was a new Samsung processor. So that may come as a surprise to you, but yeah, the first 3 iPhones were all using Samsung-made processors. We didn't have the first Apple-designed processor until the 2010 iPhone 4 that included the A4 chip. The clock speed of the processor in the 3GS came in at 600 MHz. So that was up from 412 MHz on the original iPhone as well as the iPhone 3G. Also, RAM amount here was now doubled. It came in at 256 megabytes compared to 128. And that translated into dramatically faster performance. Generally speaking here, the 3GS was more than 2 times as fast as the 3G. So let's do a little test here just to see if we can see that difference by opening up the camera. And yeah, as you can see, it definitely opened much faster on the 3GS. Let's open the settings app. Lastly here, let's try out the clock. So the 3GS was just a significantly faster phone. And that really helped, especially as third-party applications were becoming more demanding of the hardware. The other big improvement for the iPhone 3GS came to the camera. So we were now looking at a 3 megapixel sensor here compared to the 2 megapixel we had before. We now had autofocus with the tap to focus feature compared to the fixed focus we had before. And most importantly, we now had native video recording capability. So obviously this quality looks pretty terrible today, but back then it was just so cool to have this ability in your pocket. Around this era, things like the flip video camera were extremely popular, so Apple kind of needed to compete in that space with their iPhone. You could record video on the original iPhone as well as the iPhone 3G, but that required jailbreaking the device. We'll take a quick video here with the 3GS so you guys can see what that quality looks like. So here is the video recording quality on the iPhone 3GS. This is only VGA quality at 30 frames per second. You guys will have to leave me a comment below with your thoughts on the quality. By the way, the UI sounds here for starting and ending a video are really nostalgic. The other main improvement for the iPhone 3GS was a built-in compass here. As you can see, this definitely has a super nostalgic skeuomorphic design with the wooden background. This was really nice to have the built-in functionality. It really helped out the Maps application as well. Other than this, the battery was improved on the 3GS. So generally, you had a few extra hours of runtime, specifically 6 hours longer in music playback. Plus, you now had the built-in functionality to get battery percentage without having to jailbreak. You did still have to manually enable that in settings though, under the usage tab here. We also had a little bit of a precursor to Siri here on the 3GS. So you could hold down the home button to enable something they called voice control. Let's try that out now. Play songs by Weezer.
Playing songs by Weezer.
And there you go. As you can hear, I was able to command the device to play songs by a particular artist. And it basically has the same interface sounds and voice as Siri ended up having. Obviously not nearly as fully featured, and you couldn't speak to voice control as naturally as you could Siri. But definitely still cool to have. It was also really cool to invoke this using your headphones if you had one of the little built-in remotes. But aside from those upgrades, the 3GS was not hugely different from before. The following year, in 2010, we ended up getting the iPhone 4 with the amazing new premium design. And definitely next to the 3GS here, the iPhone 4 looks so much better. Aside from the all glass and stainless steel, the iPhone 4 also got the Retina display, which was so much more sharp. And in comparison, the 3GS definitely looks super pixelated and grainy. Plus we had nice things like the front-facing camera and the rear-facing flash. But for its time, the iPhone 3GS was definitely a very good upgrade. You could get it with 16 or 32 gigabytes of storage for $199 or $299 on contract. When I mention those carrier contracts, I know some of you guys might be a little bit confused about what I mean. But those were extremely common back around this era. Apple only officially offered the iPhone 3GS with the AT&T carrier. So basically they would subsidize the cost of the device if you would sign a contract with them for typically 2 years. Also, when the 3GS came out here, Apple kept around the regular 3G at a discounted price. So you could get one of those with 8 gigs of storage for only $99. I think that's when iPhone started to get really popular. Personally, several of my family members got the iPhone 3G in 2009 for that discounted $99 price. So now let's turn our attention to the software on this device specifically, what was new for iPhone OS 3. First off, this was the very last version to be referred to as iPhone OS before Apple simplified the name in 2010 just to iOS. But comparing this to iPhone OS 2, there was a ton of new functionality. Some of these are going to sound crazy to you guys, like how was this not in iOS before? So funny enough, one of the biggest features for this version was the addition of cut, copy, and paste. Previously, that clipboard functionality was just not available. You could just double tap or hold down to access the controls. So pretty crazy that was not included before. It really helped for doing things like email on the iPhone. And speaking of communicating, iPhone OS 3 included MMS support. That's a term that many of you guys probably will not even be familiar with, but it stands for multimedia messaging. Previous versions, as the icon indicate here, only had SMS. That stood for short message service, and with it you were limited to 160 characters per message. With the new MMS ability, you were able to send photos and videos. So you would see the little button here to attach a photo or video. Again, one of those things that just sounds crazy to think about a time when iOS did not have that feature. Spotlight search was also new for iPhone OS 3, so you could just swipe to the left on the home screen. Previously, that was not available, so it was much harder to search your whole device. This was pretty powerful on the iPhone as it was when it was first implemented into Mac OS X. Let's see if we can pull up some nostalgic music here. And yeah, looks like I have found my Kesha songs. Also new for this version was the Voice Memos app here. This was available on every device that ran iPhone OS 3, which by the way was every iPhone and iPod ever created up until this point. Apple didn't start dropping device support until iOS 4. I really like the look of this Voice Memos app though. Sadly, this icon was only used through I believe iOS 4.1. This version also brought in-app purchases, which was very popular for things like games. Plus, there was a new accessibility feature known as VoiceOver. So here you can see a little bit about that. Basically, it would narrate different things on your screen. Other than this, iPhone OS 3 was still pretty bare bones. You were still not able to set a wallpaper for your home screen. It was just locked into this black image. There was also no ability to put applications into folders, and there was no multitasking either. Instead, double-clicking the home button just brings you to the phone. But I believe if you were playing music in the iPod, double-clicking the home button would give you a shortcut to those controls. The built-in wallpapers for this version are the same as before. So I believe the selection here includes 19 choices. I'm pretty sure this selection had been the same since the original iPhone software 1.0. And yeah, bringing in that version here, you can see these are exactly the same. We ended up getting some new wallpapers with iOS 4, but I think these are particularly nostalgic. Of course, the globe here is always the default, but I also really like the rocks as well as these trees. I just got the device connected to Wi-Fi so we can try out a few internet-connected applications. The App Store functionality here is long gone, so you'll get the cannot connect to iTunes Store message. The same goes for YouTube. But I believe you are still able to use the Maps application. This is actually Google Maps. And yeah, that loads directly up. Let's see if we can get the satellite view. And yes, this works perfectly as well. So let's use the pinch to zoom here and zoom in to around New York City. So this is really neat to see, definitely one of the last internet connected apps that still works on this version. Let's see if the directions work. And yeah, getting directions from New York to LA definitely works. And here's what that looks like. This was basically their turn-by-turn directions back in the day. We'll also take a look here at Safari to see if that can pull anything up. Let's try out the Apple website here. So we're getting a warning message here, and yeah, it looks like that it's not going to load. Let's see if we can just Google the iPhone 3GS. And okay, that is not working either, so Safari is pretty cooked on iPhone OS 3. I believe stocks and weather here are both using Yahoo servers, so I don't think that works. Now let's take a look at the third-party applications I got synced. So I know you can have a little bit more fun with iPhone OS 3 if you are to jailbreak. But I'm just pretty averted to jailbreaking on my original OS devices. I've had some scarring experiences with that in the past. These came from an old install of iTunes that actually allowed for app syncing. I believe the version that allows that is 12.5 or below. Definitely one of my favorites here has to be Paper Toss. I definitely remember spending hours playing this back around the 2009 timeframe. Another one of my favorites was called Water Slide. So let's take a look at that one here. This game used the gyroscope to take you throughout the water slide. It looks super basic and maybe even boring by today's standards, but I remember thinking this was the coolest game ever. We have the Sims here. I never really got into this one, but I know a few people who loved it. So here's what this looks like. Basically, you, I think, create a character and you kind of like take it throughout a life. We also have Traffic Rush here. So with this one, you could shoot cars across an intersection and try to keep them from colliding. We also have Poppy Wall here. I feel like there was a whole collection of games around this theme. And you would just tap to jump the little smiley face over these lines. We have Knots here, which this was basically like Twister but for your fingers. So this was an interesting little one to play around with, although more fun if you had multiple people. We have Glow Stick here, which this is incredibly basic. It really serves no purpose. You literally just crack the glow stick and then shake the device to activate the color. We also have Fruit Ninja here. I feel like everyone is pretty familiar with this. So there is a little look at Fruit Ninja. We'll also take a look at Froggy Jump here. This also used like the tilt or accelerometer of the device. Also, we have the Pandora application here. This was like a music streaming service. And I believe this still works, so let me try and sign in to my account. As you can see, it does still stream music, which is absolutely crazy. Lastly, here we will take a look at the iPod application. This application was available on the iPhone and iPad through iOS 4. It ended up being split in iOS 5 to the separate Music and Videos app. So here for this one, we still see the Videos tab embedded. One of my favorite things about this is when you turn the device into landscape orientation, you get this feature called Cover Flow. And as the name suggests here, you could just slide through all of your album art. Then once you found an album you liked, you could just click on it to reveal the songs within. Definitely super fun and nostalgic. I am super sad that Apple took this feature away. Also, on these older iOS versions, I love that when you are playing a song, it actually turns the wallpaper of the device into the album cover. So if I click on this song here and I lock the device, you'll see that. Then if you double click the home button, you get some audio controls here. So yeah, that pretty much concludes my look at this open box iPhone 3GS. This has been incredibly cool to take a look at. As I said, I am just super happy that this one is in the white color because these seem so much more exclusive. And iPhone OS 3 is particularly nostalgic to me. One of my favorite things about this is the gray look for the dock here. I believe the thought behind this is that it kind of has a faux like metal or mesh look. Apple went away from that in iOS 4 to the more reflective style dock. Also, just speaking to the iPhone 3GS overall, this was a pretty good lasting iPhone. It ended up receiving software support through iOS 6 in 2012. And on that version, it still performs really well, so if you bought one of these new back in 2009, you got a really good usable lifespan out of it. So definitely be sure to leave me a comment below with your thoughts on this iPhone. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.